Welcome, everybody. We're going to get started since it's already a little bit late. There was a little bit of confusion about which panel is in which room. So if you're here for the panel on the minorities, that moved to E104. And this panel is together but apart. The other panel is a long walk from here. So I would say if you're here, you should stay. My name is Dan Libenson. I am the co-host of a podcast called Judaism Unbound, where we seek to explore the ideas that are going to be, that we think that others are thinking are going to be the most important ideas as we go into the Jewish future. And so, first of all, by the way, I always make this offer that I'm happy to stay here afterwards and subscribe anybody to the podcast on your phone if you don't know how to do that. But I think that the kind of conversation that we're going to be having today is the kind of conversations that we try to have on that podcast. So today, the conversation that we're talking about in terms of the future of Judaism has to do with the question of the nature of the relationship between Jews in America and Jews in Israel. And I say though, and I phrase it that way intentionally because, as we know, and many of you are, there are Jews in America today that are from Israel. There are Jews in Israel that are from America. So I think we want to have nuance to this conversation, that we're talking about people living in these two great population centers of Jewish life. But I think that we can cut that in a variety of ways, which I hope that we will. So I think that I'm going to introduce the panelists briefly, just say a couple of words of framing, and then I'm hoping that we'll just be able to have a thoughtful, informal conversation as opposed to statements. And then we'll try to leave some time for questions from you all. So let me introduce the panelists. Sitting here to my right is Tehila Friedman. She is the director of the Jewish Peoplehood Department and a research fellow at the Shalom Hartman Institute. She has a whole lot of other credentials, but because of time, I think I'm just going to leave them off. Sitting next to Tehila is Yehudah Glick, until recently a member of Knesset for the Likud party, who is also the president of the Shalom Jerusalem Foundation and is known specifically for his work on trying to advocate for the right of Jews to pray at the Temple Mount. And sitting at the end over there, ironically to our right, is Noam Pianko, who is the Samuel N. Strom Chair of Jewish Studies and professor at the School of International Studies at the University of Washington, and relevant to this topic, the author of two books on this basic topic that we're talking about, Zionism and the Roads Not Taken, Ravidovich, Kaplan, Cohn, and Jewish Peoplehood and American Innovation. So I thought we'd start there with this American innovation of Jewish peoplehood, because I think that that's a confusing formulation, right? I mean, that when we talk about Jewish peoplehood, I think people imagine that Jewish peoplehood has been around since there were Jewish people, and you call it an American innovation. So I'm wondering, from the perspective of what we see as potentially two populations of Jews on a divergent pathway, where in Israel, you could say that over time, and it is natural for a country, that the definition of who is part of this people is the people that were living in this place, and their children and their grandchildren, and here in America, it may very well be that between intermarriage and all sorts of other new ideas about what Judaism even should be. We recently interviewed Robert Mnookin from Harvard Law School, who was talking about a hoped-for definition of a Jew, that a Jew should be somebody who declares themselves to be a Jew, that it should be a self-determination. And when we start to see the definition of what a Jew even is becoming divergent, I think the question becomes, what is the nature of the relationship between those different kinds of Jews, and do we have historical precedent? How should we even begin to think about that?
A few simple questions to try to address. I actually spoke a little about peoplehood on the earlier panel, so I'm happy to refer you to my book on that, or we could talk a little about it. So I kind of wanted to focus a little bit on the way in which peoplehood is impacting the way that we are becoming more and more divergent. I think in the last elections, well, there have been 2 of the last elections, but I've been trying to explain to students and community members a little bit about what's going on in the Israeli elections, what are the key issues. And what's been really interesting to me is that the key issues sort of driving the Israeli elections have a lot to do with the very particular case of Netanyahu, and also issues of the role that religion plays in the state, and specifically ultra-Orthodox Jews. And for American Jews, that's not really on the radar screen of what the issues are in Israel. The issue in Israel is something that I didn't see really as an issue at all in this last election, which is the question of the Palestinians and a 2-state solution. So I think that is, to me, the fundamental growing gap between these 2 communities. And the reason it's so important for Jewish peoplehood is because it has a lot to do with our own political outlooks on the world. As American Jews, we are very interested in minority rights, liberal values, democratic values, and for most of American Jews who are on the kind of liberal camp, vote Democrat. The key issue today is focusing on making sure that minorities in this country are protected. And the key issue in the Israeli election, in some ways, has been very much not the only minorities are being frustrated with the place of ultra-Orthodox in society, but really not at all about Palestinians and about the occupied territories. And just as a personal note, I am on the right, but maybe I'm kind of supposed to be the left person on this panel. Who knows how far left, if I'm the 3rd opinion or the 25th opinion. But what I will just say is my observation from being here today in my first E3 is when you look at these 2 communities, there have been very few mentions of Palestinians today, of occupied territories today. There was one reference in the opening when it really talked about Palestinians who are burning flags, which is, I think, one way of Palestinians as sort of terrorists. And there's one author who gave a talk about, a Jewish author giving a book about his vision of the Palestinians. But that question doesn't seem to be in this conversation. I don't think it's in Israel's conversation. And to me, that is a key question for the American Jewish community. And I'm really struggling with how to possibly bridge that gap. I mean, as an American, in the last panel, we have somebody sitting here who is talking about Israel as a robust democracy, and also somebody who's supportive of, or at least connected to parties that are supportive of annexing the West Bank. And as somebody who's a minority in this country and thinking about my Jewish values, they are really different. And I wouldn't call those democratic values that I would want to be actually fighting for as a Jew or as an American. So to me, the key crisis or the challenge that peoplehood or American Jewish-Israel relations face right now is that our political realities and our values seem to be going in really different directions, and we're just not even talking about the same issues. And I think, to me, that's the greatest threat that the Jewish collective faces today.
So, Yehudah, Glick, I'm thinking about, Noam talked about, right, how American Jews, for example, are thinking dominantly about the Palestinians, and that seems to be more and more absent from the Israeli discourse, and that means, I interpret that to mean a little bit that they're kind of talking past each other, that we're just not interested in the same things. And I'm thinking about your work towards Jewish prayer on the Temple Mount, and I say, with great respect, that's not something that's of interest to me. I don't have strong feelings. I'm just not that interested in that. And as an American Jew, and as a person, that's just sort of not something that I've ever thought of. It reminds me of one time I was speaking to a group of evangelical Christians, and they were asking me to introduce Judaism to them. And I gave a little bit of introduction, and then they kept asking me things about the Messiah, and I said to them after about 15 minutes, the amount of time that I've thought about the Messiah in this conversation is more than I've thought about the Messiah in my entire life up till this moment. It's just not something that I'm thinking about, and so obviously I don't have a peoplehood with those people. So I'm wondering how you think about the notion that there are things that you as an individual or groups with which you're affiliated, think it's sort of one of the most important things in the world, and here's another group of Jews that thinks that's just not important at all, and what does that mean in terms of the nature of our ongoing relationship?
Okay. First of all, shalom, everybody. I wish us all a really enlightened day. It's really a pleasure to be here, and I have the opportunity of really thanking those who organized this thing, and I think this dialogue is super, super, super important. I feel that the Messiah interests me not at all. I have no dealing with him, and I really don't. He plays no factor in my Jewish life, and I don't know what the connection between the Messiah and what I deal with is at all.
No, that was just.
And I know. Don't worry. Believe me, I know. This morning I went to shul. Later on, I went to church today. I was at both today. I spoke at both, and I know exactly what the Messiah plays for different people. But Messiah has nothing to do with. I talk about reality, and in reality, I see what I'm dealing with. Now, why am I dealing with the Temple Mount? And I don't see how it differs from the issues that Noam brought up, and I think that they're tight, connected to each other. Who are we as a Jewish people? What does it mean, Zionism? What does, for me, Zionism 3.0 mean? And when I look at it, I see that we're living today in an era of the fulfillment of what was promised in a book, bestseller, written thousands of years ago, where God says he's going to scatter the people of Israel around the world and eventually bring them back home. But he has a goal for the people. When he very first chose Abraham, he said, I want you to be, you and your descendants, to be a source of blessing to the entire world. I want, and God continues on, speaks about a world center for peace. So if we have a place which is supposed to represent God, and God's name is Shalom. Shalom means, in my eyes, I know some people think that Shalom means let's destroy settlements and Shalom. I know it's an interesting, I have an original issue. I believe that Shalom is Shalom. You know, Shalom is living peacefully. I know it's very strange, it's not talking about deporting 500,000 Jews from their houses and calling that peace. No, it's talking about living peacefully. And the same thing is, when we're talking about a place which is the most sanctified place in the world for billions of people, all the people that believe in the Bible, Jews, Christians, Muslims, billions of people in the world believe in the Bible. And it talks about the world center of peace. From this place, all nations will stream, and from here will come a message of peace to the world. And if this place is a world center of incitement and hate and encouraging terror, in my eyes, for me, who Jerusalem is the capital of every single Jew for thousands of years, praying towards Jerusalem, concluding our Passover Seder, Jerusalem. And if Jerusalem becomes a world center of incitement, that's a danger for me, because and so I want to promote a message from Jerusalem, from the Temple Mount, which is Zion. Zion is the name of the Temple Mount. You can't do anything about that. Zionism. Zion in the Bible is one thing, the Temple Mount. Jerusalem is called the city of Zion because that's where the Temple Mount is. But Zion is the Temple Mount. You can check Psalms 2, you can check Joel 4, and several other places. So what I'm trying to do is promote an understanding that if a place is sanctified to so many people in the name of God, and God's name is Shalom, it should be a world center of Shalom. And I think that that's quite a reasonable thing to deal with. And it's part of what Noam was speaking about. If I want to live peacefully with the Arabs living next to me, because I believe in peace, and I go in my shopping center in Gush Etzion, and I see people living together, that's peace. In my eyes, upgrading settlements is not peace. It's destruction. In my eyes, peace is living peacefully. And therefore, if people are dealing with the rights of minorities, and I'll conclude, I understand that's my last sentence, when I want to promote peace, no less than Noam does. But I believe that though, yes, there's an argument of one-state solution, two-state solution, 80 years ago we were talking about the final solution. So thank God we're not there. But today, when I look at the reality today, I see the options are two-state non-solution, two-state continue suicide situation, or one-state living peacefully. I know which one I prefer. I prefer Shalom. That's my entire life. The organization I stand there is called Shalom Jerusalem because I truly believe in Shalom.
So I think that the question, though, is, and Tehila, I'd love for you to sort of step in on this, because I think you should try to, how do we talk about bridging this? Because I hear how passionate you feel about that particular thing. the question is, how does one have an ongoing relationship with somebody who hears that passion and says, yeah, this is not really my issue. I don't think it should be our issue. I hear that it's your issue, right? But we're different. We're different populations that are just not interested in the same things. And it's not to say that you're wrong. It's just to say that I'm not interested in that. So that feels to me to somewhat to describe a certain element of the diagnosis of these two communities, that they're just, it's not that they profoundly disagree with one another. Sometimes they do. It's just that they're focused in completely different directions. And what does that look like going forward?
I was listening to you. Can you hear me? What we do? I don't know.
You get some tech.
Yeah, I definitely can help.
You hold it up to your mouth.
You want to try this one? This one's working very good.
Can you hear me now? Okay, it's going to be a little weird, but let's try.
Okay, I wonder what they did here.
Okay, we did this. No, well, okay. So I was listening to you. No, it can't work like that.
Oh, you can hold it, don't worry.
Okay, so I was listening to you, and I felt like you are doing no. Like, how come you Israelis are so interested in those nonsense of religion and state, and not pay any attention in your endless election campaign twice to the Palestinian issue, which is the most important one. And I felt frustrated because, as a Jewish woman, religion and state are far from being nonsense. Twice. First, because I have great impact on my daily life as a woman, being discriminated in many ways. Second, because I feel that it's part of my fight over what Judaism is, how we design it, what it means to be sovereign Jewish state. So the place of Judaism and creating Judaism that holds human values has also to do with equality of women, has also to do, and this is the heart of religion and state. So, saying, oh, this is so not important comparing to the conflict with the Palestinian, I feel it's not to take in account that we are a real state, a real place. We have a real life. It's not, visionary, idealistic, a theoretical question. When we vote, it's as if, I would say, I look at your election and I'm thinking, how come that the American society that has the biggest economical gaps between poor and rich people, how come it's so not important? Versus minorities issue, immigrants issue, how come it's so not, as a Jewish person, my Jewish values has to do with how you treat poor people, things like that. How come? Judging another society priorities and not seeing how important religion and state issues are to our daily life. And not understanding that part of us kind of gave up of the opportunity to have peace agreement in the close future. Doesn't mean we totally gave up, but it means that we're not willing that this one and only issue will overshadow everything else. It's almost like we were kidnapped by that. It's like, this is, it's not legit to deal with anything else internally. We have real issues. Now, why I'm so frustrated? Because I feel that it's a great example of the way we look at each other. So many times, I feel that for American Jews, many of treat Israel as a political question, not as a real place of a real people living there. Now, I'm not saying we're any better when it's coming to the other side. We also treat American Jewry as let's say, in a very instrumental ways sometimes. So I'm not saying it's, one way, not at all. But enough with it. You've been in Israel, I guess, enough to know that it's not true. It's a complicated place with, we have our issues like any other place. We have our advantages, disadvantages. It's weird to say it about Israel. We're a normal place. So I know it's not true. We're not normal. But to some extent, we're normal. So yes, it is important, religion-state issues. It is. It's not nonsense. And also Jewishly, it's not nonsense.
Right, I'm sorry if you misunderstood me saying that that isn't important. I was merely saying that it represents a gap between the two communities, how different communities see different things as important. I think the issues of religion and state are crucial in Israel, and in fact, I think one of the challenges for peoplehood is that the state of Israel has been one of the most damaging realities for global Jewry because the state and Israel, because religion and state are so connected. That actually, I think that it's allowed ultra-Orthodoxy to expand considerably because it has political support, and it's also kind of erased many of the benefits that liberal Judaism has brought to the religion. So I deeply agree with it's important. I was merely trying to point out that there's a gap in that wasn't part of the elections, and that is part of how American Jews think about Israel. And one of the reasons I think the gap is so great is that American Jews have such a different understanding of Judaism than Israelis do. So I totally agree, and I wasn't trying to belittle that. I was just merely pointing out that there seems to be a real gap in the way in which Israelis feel that they've tried to make peace and it hasn't worked, and most of the society feels comfortable with that reality, and I don't think most American Jews feel that way.
First of all, I'm not sure that you represent most of American Jews. When I've met Jews, and I was a member of Knesset, I met thousands of Jewish groups. Rarely any of them brought up the question about the Palestinians. Almost every one of them brought up the question about the Western Wall, the conversion, the recognition of rabbis here in America. So on the Palestinian issue, maybe in interests, Noam, I don't think you represent everybody. But I think the second thing, and that's like the most important thing, you say, you people think you tried peace and it didn't work. Listen, the reality is in Israel, we didn't try peace and it didn't work. We buried 1,000 of our friends, 2,000 Palestinians from this experiment that has not worked because that we know, and the world knows, and even I know that you're not allowed to mention in San Francisco the American administration, present administration, but the facts are that everybody in the world knows that the Palestinian Authority is corrupt. And everybody knows that there's no ability in today's present leadership in the Palestinian world to reach any kind of agreement. The Israeli present Israeli government, Netanyahu, who supports strongly settlements, was willing to freeze settlements for a year just to make progress, and no progress made. We buried 1,000 Jews and 2,000 Palestinians in the time of forcing us to go into various different experiments. These experiments cost lives. So yes, today, the feeling in Israel that in the near future, there won't be any kind of solution, and maybe the present status quo is the worst, but the only thing that exists as a possibility, and any kind of experiment to try to impose upon us things that are going to cost our lives. Yes, if there's, God forbid, a Palestinian state near our airport and missiles fall on our airport, it's going to change Israel. That day there's not going to be any more tourism in Israel. That day the economy is going to sink. These are things that we care about. And we feel that any kind of sitting in Washington State, in Seattle, and telling us how we should act to the Palestinians, we go out of our way. And we put a soldier in jail for misbehaving towards Palestinians, and every single time that happens, and those are minorities in the Israeli army, even though there are organizations that try to make that as if that represents everything, we care about the Palestinians. I'll tell you more than that. If God forbid, the settlements are uprooted, as many of you and your friends would like, that day, 1 million Palestinians stopped eating food because we feed 300,000 Palestinians who feed 1 million members of their families. So we are the ones that are feeding them. Just to give an example, SodaStream was moved from Mishor Adumim to the Negev a few years ago because of the pressure. What happened? All the Palestinians that were working there are now unemployed and they don't have jobs.
Can I just jump in? I just want to jump in on one thing because I don't want this panel to be focused on the substance of the No, but I want to suggest, because I'm interested in your response. When I hear some of this, I think we were actually, Ruth Calderon and I were having a conversation earlier, and we were laughing. Like, it would be really interesting to invite Esther Perel, who is a relationship counselor, a famous relationship counselor, to moderate a panel like this, because it would be really interesting to say, like, look, I have no doubt that you have a point of view in which everything that you're saying is absolutely correct, as does Noam. The question is, what is the nature of our ongoing relationship? Because it's not going to be you convincing Noam or Noam convincing you. It's going to be a question of how do we maintain a relationship when we don't agree.
You misunderstood what I was trying to say. I was not trying to convince people in my opinion. I was trying to say that the fact that that subject is not being dealt is not because we don't care about it, but because we have an opinion towards it. And the fact that it wasn't in the elections today has a reasoning. And not because we don't care about it, but it's because we do care about it. And because it does bother us, but we think that right now, the questions of religion and state are what cares about Israel. And I think not only we care about it, because who cares about it? The Reform and conservative rabbis that meet with me who care about the recognition of Israel, of their conversions in their communities. So when we are dealing in our elections about that subject, and I would say finally, the first time in so many years that these questions are not on the table, because pressure from the American Jewry. Now we get attacked. Why did we not deal with these? Why are we dealing with the things that the diaspora Jewries want us to deal with? We're dealing with the things that we feel are important. And yes, each one of those things is important. And right now, in the near future, the Palestinian issue, there's no big difference between the different parties in the Israeli Knesset, I don't think. And the reality today is a status quo which we can live with.
I think now, thinking about it second time, that I might be wrong about what you said. In terms of maybe what you're saying is that you, as someone who lives as a minority, naturally look at minorities' place in Israel as something very, very important and something that reflect. I mean, you have a point of view different than our point of view as a majority. And maybe really that's the heart of the conflict, not conflict, but the
friction.
The friction.
Yeah, I think that's, going back to Yehudah, what you were saying before about, everybody should have a right and shalom. I mean, those words are really nice, but I don't think the Palestinians feel that there's shalom right now. In other words, when you're going to your settlement, and you might feel shalom, but I certainly have met Palestinians that don't feel the same way. So when I'm in the perspective where somebody who's in the majority, who has power, especially who is is mixing theology and politics, and basically what you did is, I think, really the core challenge for American Jews is you said the Torah says that this is the most holy place, and therefore Jews should be allowed to have a right to that place. Now, you can't have a religious view and say Jews can go anywhere they want, but also have political boundaries that say Palestinians can't go where they want. You have to choose. Either you have a modern state that has its boundaries and treats everybody in those boundaries equally, or you have one state that acknowledges that it's being based on a Bible with a certain theological message.
But I want to ask you something.
Yeah.
Now, after I understand differently what you said before, can you appreciate, I can understand why it's very important to me as Israeli to hear all the time the voices coming from America in order not to lose sensitivities that otherwise I'm losing as a majority. And I'm gaining a lot from this dialogue because your perspective is bringing some things that I'm missing. But can you see it's opposite? Can you see that our perspective as as Jews who are asking themselves questions of majority, of sovereign state, of public sphere, Jewishly, do you see that it's also giving something to you?
I do. I think for me, it's increasingly, if the Jewish and democratic are crucial, and it's very hard for me as a two-state solution disappears, and the reason it's so important to me is that I have a hard time understanding, as an American Jew who's very close to Israel, how there can be a Jewish and democratic state in the future. And I think it'll be very difficult for many American Jews to explain their connection to a state that is only Jewish and not democratic. So to me, that's a threat. And I don't know exactly, so I can respect what is to be in the majority.
It's also a threat for me. I don't want to live in and I don't know.
I really, I feel something going on here, which I felt really from the morning. As if in Israel there are two parties. One wants a Jewish state and a democracy, and one doesn't want a democracy. And maybe we have a different understanding how to promote the idea of a Jewish democracy. For me, they used to say, Borg used to say, well, which side are you, Jewish and democracy? He said, I'm the line that connects between them. For me, it's not that at all. For me, there cannot be a Jewish state that's not democratic. When God took us out of Egypt, he said, you know the soul of a stranger, and you are to make sure not to resist. For me, a democracy, a Jewish state is a democratic state. My understanding of the way we are promoting the state of Israel is towards a democracy. We have an argument, and the same thing Tzipi Livni today, she came and showed, I am for democracy, and I'm posing opinions that are not from the. I think the delegitimization, and the same thing about what you said a bit before, I meet with Palestinians on a daily basis. Unfortunately, many of them cannot say publicly what they tell you because they're afraid to be killed. But if you ask me, I'm willing to go for a referendum among the Palestinian world with international support, making sure people vote according to their threat. I promise you that the mass majority of the Palestinians are not interested in Palestinians. But we're not going to, again, I don't want to go to that point. I want to go to the idea that you, again and again, are looking at us and saying, I want a Jewish and democratic state. You don't want, and it's going to be hard for me to explain how Israel can be a Jewish state and not a democracy. That, in my eyes, is not a fair statement. In my eyes, you want to argue, we can argue, is my way bringing Israel to be more democracy? My idea, I feel that Israel going in my way of turning into one state is bringing towards democracy, and a two-state is against democracy. In my ideas, in Israel, when I look at the minority, the Arab minority in Israel, where we were 10 years ago and where we are today, how many more Arab students there are, how many more Arab professors there are, how many more Arab deans of faculties in universities there are, to call Israel not a democracy or leading towards a non-democracy, that is an arrogant perspective. And very often, Israel looks upon the American Jewry with arrogance. Very often, the Americans look upon Israel with arrogance. And I think the time has come that we should respect each other. We, the Israelis, should respect, yes, the Jewish diaspora has an opinion, but the Jewish diaspora should respect the fact that we have an opinion, and it's not that we don't want a democracy and you want a democracy, it's that we have different understandings of how to promote a democratic state. And this is a very important point, which I think should come out of this conference.
So here's my concern, again, about even the tenor and the tone of the conversation that we're trying to, first of all, I don't want to get fixated only on the Palestinian issue. Obviously, it's extremely important, and Noam made a point about it. But I think we should talk beyond, because it's not only about the Palestinian issue, right? We have all kinds of areas where we have different visions of Judaism and where we want to put the emphasis of Judaism here in America and in Israel. And by the way, I think it's wrong of any of us to imagine that any of the, like you were saying, Yehudah, about the community in Israel, it's not that there's just these two parties and whatever. You know, that's true in America too. So I spend a lot of my time not with rabbis, not with congregations, but with your ordinary Jews who are not affiliated with any of those organizations. And the one thing that I can tell you about how they feel about this is that the nature of this conversation is toxic, and I want to have nothing to do with it. Right? Meaning that if we're going to be fighting about, who did what and when, look, it's not with anger. It's with saying, like, look, I'm an American, I got my own troubles. We've got some pretty serious problems here. Let me just spend my time with that because that's toxic enough. I don't need two toxic conversations. So I feel like there's some way, and that's why I'm searching for an ideal, right? And I guess I'm asking, I'd like to ask you, Tehila, aspirationally, and I think I'd like to ask you, Noam, historically. If we talk about a healthy peoplehood or a healthy relationship between these two communities that, right, with every passing year grow more and more distant from one another in time. Now there are exchanges between them, maybe that can change, but it almost feels to me like it would be the most natural thing in the world for those two communities to drift apart. And so my historical question is like, is this a sui generis? Like, is there any precedent for any other people in the history of the world that, that were in different places and that maintained a strong connection with one another, the way that we talk about what we aspire to with peoplehood, or with whatever we want to call the relationship between Jews in the diaspora and Jews in Israel. And if there's no historical precedent for it, and it's really, but we might say, but that's the genius of Judaism. We are the only ones who successfully have done that for 2,000 years. Then I'd like to understand how, and how could we bring that back? Because it seems like it's with inattention, it's not going to happen. So I don't know, Tehila, what's your vision of if this was going well?
I was thinking this Shabbat. In Parashat Shavua, we read Lech Lecha, and actually we started to read about the family of Abraham. So I thought it's interesting. All Genesis is about a family, but it's far from being a book with family values. Really, like no one normal family there. I heard once someone saying that if Sigmund Freud was more connected to his Jewish roots, we wouldn't have the Oedipus complex, we would have the Cain complex. No, you laugh, but it's really deep. I mean, relationship between siblings are a deep issue. In Genesis. And I thought, so what is the message? I think the message is to say, first we're people, okay? Before everything else, we're not a religion, we're not shared believers. Before everything else, we're a family. And at the same time, family is extremely complicated thing. And it's natural for family to, it's not only to fight. Think about Genesis. It's, what they do to each other is much more than fighting. So I think we need to develop a more mature language about the relationship between the two centers that on one hand holds the notion of family, on the other hand it's not kitsch. It's because think of your families, okay? So we tend to talk about each other as if we are, siblings, like kids who grew up at the same house. Maybe it's more accurate to say maybe we're like siblings who are now married and has, significant others, and the commitment to the partner in a way coming before, or at least as important, and how you navigate it when there is a conflict between your relationship with your brother and your relationship with your spouse. That, I think, is more accurate. Okay, when our Prime Minister came to here to talk about the nuclear weapon, I felt he's not taking seriously enough your relationship with your significant other, means America. While when sometimes people are coming to Israel, shouting about the Kotel. By the way, I'm, in this case, in your side, but it's another story. Not taking seriously enough, I think, political commitment and like the commitment to our significant other, who's Israel. I mean, it's weird to put it that way, but it's not either or. It's not like either we care about each other and then that's a first priority, or we just split. It's more complicated than that. For me, when you say there is almost no other options than splitting, I feel that no way we're giving up. Because, just because for me, being Jewish is first and foremost being part of this family. And it's coming almost before anything else. That's who I am. Asking me why you are Jewish or why stay Jewish or all those questions is like asking me why you are a woman, because that's who I am. And which makes a relationship extremely important, complicated, and important. No way I'm giving up on my brother and sisters. And sometimes it's complicated, fine. So we'll
Do you have thoughts practically, though? How practically
Yeah,
can we...
yeah, I have actually some practical thought. First, from the Israeli side, I think we need to develop platforms for ongoing dialogue, not on base of crisis. What happens all the time is that all the conversations are happening when there is a crisis. Crisis around conversion, crisis around the Kotel, crisis around, shouldn't be like that. We should develop platforms. I'm imagining something like having in the starting of every Knesset session, we have like 3 terms of the Knesset. How do you say that? Moshavim. Terms, that's fine. To do like a hearing. Knesset members sitting with representative of diaspora Jewry organizations and do just hearing, on all kind of issues. Another platform can be, the way you had the environmental movement develop something that you measure the footprint of, when you make a new law, you measure what's going to be the impact of it on environment. So I'm thinking maybe we can develop some kind of mechanism to see any law we are passing in the Knesset, what's going to be the impact on relationship with diaspora Jewry. That's doable. I mean, I have all kind of thoughts of what can we do from the Israeli side, because I don't like to be Eitz-Geber of what you need to do, but what we need to do. I think we can develop all kind of platforms to develop ongoing dialogue. And I feel that it's not necessarily that, the Knesset members will agree with what they heard, but the fact they heard is going to make a lot of difference.
Thank you. Noam, is there any historical sort of analysis of this?
Well, I think what's really interesting is when Ben-Gurion and Blaustein first kind of decided in the 1950s about how they're going to relate to each other, what Blaustein said to Ben-Gurion was, American Jews will support you. At that time, most American Jews were non-Zionist or not Zionist, anti-Zionist. But he said that, the state of Israel will not do anything that will harm the well-being of the American Jews. In other words, dissent and making sure, what Yehudah said before was something that, he felt was chutzpahdik in some ways. But, and I think that's actually changed. I think most American Jews are much more nervous about dissent and about criticizing Israel in public. But historically, there was a lot of room for American Jews to expect that their connection to Israel was not automatic. It was based on the fact that Israel also respected their own situation. I think, just because this feels like kind of, it's like hitting a wall here a little bit, so I'm a little bit of a pessimistic moment. But when it comes down to it, I think Israelis need global Jewry as part of their political ideology, right? The nation state of the Jewish people, that the legitimacy of the Jewish state is integrally connected to its relationship as a safeguard for Jews around the world. American Jews need Israel because there aren't a lot of other ways. It's kind of our civil religion, and there aren't many. That's one way. But but when it comes down to it, I don't really know what we have in common. American Jews and Israelis are different from family because families grow up, they speak the same language, they have the same culture, or they choose to marry one another. Our histories are very ancient, and we speak different languages, we have different experiences, we come at the world from different kind of perspectives, and I'm not sure, I'm sure we live here. There are a lot of Israelis. I know how many Israelis hang out. I live in Seattle. A lot of Israelis, a lot of American Jews. They rarely hang out together, because we're very different. We don't speak. And so I guess my question is that one thing that we have in common is this Jewish heritage. I think the challenge with that is it's interpreted so differently in our different places that even our understanding of what messages we get from that Jewish heritage are interpreted through very different lights. And so for me, the underlying question here is, what is it that we share with one another, really share, not just in our imaginations? And I don't, it's become increasingly difficult for me to kind of figure that out. So it's not that I just feel like, oh, Israel has to live up to our standard. For me, I just feel like we are going really quickly in opposing directions, and I'm having a hard time figuring out what will bring us together, other than technology or startups or whatever else that that people are working on. So that to me is the real crisis and the real question, and I don't know that we have an answer to that.
So I know because they're not going to allow us to go late because the next one is here. I want to make sure that there's a little bit of time. No, we're not ending. I want to let the audience ask some questions if there are some, just because we only have about 10 minutes left, and they're not going to let us go late. So does anybody like to ask there? Yeah, in the front, in the second row there.
Yeah. So two things. One for Yehudah. I'm confused at your literal biblical interpretation. The Bible says lots of things that we don't do. Lots and lots of things that are open to interpretation. If you're literally interpreting, it's not a cherry pick, right? You can't literally interpret pieces of the Torah to sort of lay claim to your heritage. It doesn't work that way, right? Torah also says we stone people. Torah also says we do lots of things. We don't do these things anymore. We adapt, we change, we're dynamic. That's why we know who Jews are. We don't know any Hittites, right? This is why we so this is just a comment. I mean,
It's not a comment on me at all. It's a comment on Noam's interpretation of me. I never said ever that I do because the Torah said we do. It's not what I said. It is not at all what I said. That's what he said, I'm not dealing things realistically. I'm dealing because the Torah said. It's not what I said. I said the facts are.
Well,
no, I did not say.
My second question is really open to the panel, and that's about sort of peoplehood writ large. My question is, I don't think, frankly, any of us at this conference individually speak for Israelis or Americans, right? We are a diverse, dynamic, very spread apart group of people. It's silly for any of us to claim that we speak for Israelis or we don't. My question is really, is there an angle for each of you individually where you can see a touch point, at least one space to start talking about peoplehood and sort of the unification of Jewish people? Is there any space that works to talk about peoplehood as a concept where we can maybe meet at least in a kind of a ground level where a conversation can really focus on the things that unite us?
Okay.
does anybody want to specifically? Okay. Okay, well, so let's take a couple of questions, but short. Question ends with a question mark, and it has only one sentence. So let's take 3 or 4 questions, and then we'll let the panelists discuss and wrap it up. So yes, gentleman in the middle there, yeah. Okay, that's great. Thank you. Next question. Yes, in the. Which leaders of the world Jewish community will be invited to the Knesset? Yes. Yes, you have the front.
If I understood you correctly, you're advocating one state, people living in peace. Given the demographics, would Israel not become not cease to be a Jewish state?
Would a one-state solution cease to be Jewish because of the demographics? Yes.
I think a lot of the problem with the dialogue is that Israelis and Israel is fighting for its life, and American Jews think Israel, which is an ethnic nationalist country with minorities,
Is this a question? Do you have a question?
so what do you think about it?
Okay. One last question. Yeah. One last question. Oh, yes, sir.
Okay, so a fact and a question.
No fact, just question.
Pew report 2005, 58% of Jews intermarry, 42% marry Jews. We take that down one more generation, it brings us down the next generation to 18% of called Jews marrying Jews. So are we as a American community really a Jewish community relative to Israel?
So because of intermarriage, is it fair to call the American Jewish community a Jewish community in comparison to Israel, where there's much less intermarriage? So take the tenor of the question. I mean, I think really the question, a lot of these questions come down to this ongoing question of, let me just sort of formulate it a little bit. Like, I think that Noam sort of talked about it a little bit, like, it feels, Noam, I think I learned this from you on our podcast, the idea that the concept of peoplehood in part was generated because we weren't agreeing much about Judaism, and could we at least agree that we're a people? I sort of wonder whether, that has run its course and not worked, and whether we actually somehow have to find a Judaism that we can work on together. Right, a sense that we actually, we have a project, and I think that there was a time when it was understood that Israel was that project, and maybe that's not quite working well. And without pointing fingers and without blaming, because I think that's not productive, and I think it's generally not right, not correct. I just wonder if in a closing you can sort of reflect on what would bring us closer, or what challenges might we face that would that even just give a little bit of a sense of optimism of how we might find some way to move forward together, even in the face of some of the challenges that some of the questioners have.
Well, in some ways, peoplehood was a way of squaring the fact that Jews wanted to be both a nationality and a religion, and wanted to figure out a concept that would bridge those two, and peoplehood became that. And for, I think, the last several decades, we've been able to kind of be both. I think what's happening now is we're being forced to choose between those once again, because those questions have been reopened. The biggest threat, I would say, and this was another question, I think this word unity is really a problematic one. I think that unity, ultimately, it is a way of creating clear boundaries of who's inside and who's outside. And I don't think that we should be striving toward unity. I think that that's not a good way forward. And somebody said, not a little America. And look, obviously, Israel is not a little America, although frankly, the way that American Jews were originally taught to really be connected to Israel was that it was little America, if you go back to what Brandeis used to write. I think there's enough flexibility. It doesn't have to be little America. On the other hand, Jewish and democratic has been the language. At what point do those two terms no longer work together? And it's going to be very difficult, I think, for American Jews to be committed to something that is so different from their own political values in this country. And then in terms of like 18% intermarriage, you know, in general, that raises, you know, the alarm bells about the American diaspora Jewish community. You know, there are also alarm bells about what it means to have power and to, you know, have Judaism go in all sorts of different directions where key Jewish values are interpreted in ways because of political power that might mean that would you rather have a kid who's not Jewish or somebody who's doing things in the name of Judaism that is really different from what are we trying to preserve the people themselves and this group, or are we trying to preserve a sense of ideals and goals and visions? So to me, that's what I would focus on, is which communities are helping to develop Judaism to the most kind of creative and ethical dimensions that they can be developed toward.
Yehudah?
Small cheering
There's
crowd, large.
There was a story of 3 scientists who were put on an island with only elephants. And they were told to write a paper. After 3 months, the French guy wrote about love amongst elephants. 3 months later, the German wrote a thesis about consistency among the daily life of elephants. 3 months later, the Jew wrote a book about Jews and the elephants and the Jewish identity questions. And I think that the very fact that people in America care that Israel is not enough listening to them, the very fact shows that the claiming that the division is dividing us is wrong. Because if it was dividing us, then the American Jews would not care. And what I want to point out, and this is what I want to conclude with this, Israel, the Jews in Israel and Jews in America, the Jews in diaspora, need each other desperately. I think very often each side is sure the other one needs him more than he does. But I do think that a few years ago, when the government that was leading the government was against my political opinion, completely against. And in my eyes, they were endangering Israel. They were bringing terror. But at no point did I ever say, that's not my government. I plead to all of you, we have what to learn. Maybe we should do an opposite birth rate program. Have Israelis come to live among Jewish communities more and more. I think that would be very fruitful for both sides. But I do think that we should always remember that our relationship is unconditionable. The fact, even our disagreements as great as they are, we are, whether Noam likes it or not, we are one nation. And I want to conclude with one answer, which I can't resist. I was very insulted by the question, what do I think about violence against Palestinians? I mean, I don't know any Jew in the world that supports that. And anytime anybody in my village that I lived in, Othniel, if the rabbi would catch anybody talking not nicely to a Palestinian, immediately he would take him to the police. But unfortunately, in the Palestinian leadership, I'm looking for leadership that is willing to condemn murder, is willing to condemn. So yes, there's no question about it. And I don't even think, how can you even ask me a question? What do I think about people murdering wives? Why didn't you ask me that question? I'm insulted that you asked me that question. I think it's a disgrace in God's name. The only obligation that appears in every one of the 5 books of Moses is that anybody who pours somebody else's blood, his blood should be poured because we were all created in the image of God. And I don't think anybody who believes in any kind of Judaism can think otherwise. And I don't understand why the question was faced to me.
Okay, thank you. That's great. Tehila.
You said that the democratic and Jewish are seems like in conflict, and this is it. For me, that's a challenge. What's the mission? The mission is to solve the conflict or to create Judaism that hold both democratic values and particular values. Is that doable? Of course it is. Is that easy? Of course not. It's a process. Look, it's happening all over the world. Is someone saying, you know, England is over because Hungary, excuse me, here. The conflict between liberal values and national values, that's international crisis. What's our mission? To create or to strengthen or to recreate the center. To create Judaisms that don't stand on one feet, either liberal values or national, particular, or whatever, either universal or no. We are standing on two legs. So yes, we are in international crisis. It's a challenge. It's not a reality and this is it, and I'm going to pick side and goodbye to the other one. And I feel that in my life, I'm kind of devoting my life to this challenge of creating humanistic Judaism. And I know I have many partners here, and I have many partners in Israel. And actually, most of us are trying to find the right balance. And we need each other for that. In no way I'm willing to say, okay, we picked one leg, you picked another leg, goodbye. No, not here. You are facing, challenges here, not there, my original here. We're partners in this challenge, and Yachol Nuchalo, we'll do it.
Well, I'll just say that, thank you, that I've heard Yehudah Kurtzer say, I don't know if it means you're coming up in the world or going down in the world when you're asked to facilitate the panel and not be on the panel, but I'll take a prerogative to just make one note that I think that, picking up on something that Noam said, when I think about some of the extraordinary relationships between Israelis and Americans that are happening outside of the sort of official panels and the official conferences and the official organizations. And when I think about one of the most brilliant creative rabbis in America today, Amichai Levi, an Israeli, who's bringing that to America and creating some kind of hybrid. And when we see other Israelis, like even here at the JCC and everything that's going on in the Jewish in the world of the JCC and the Israeli programs that are happening here, and the way that some of the programs that were originally designed here for Israelis are now getting American versions. So so I wonder whether there would be whether the source of hope is in relationships like that and the growing amount of interplay between people from Israel and people from America, as opposed to saying Israel and the American Jewish community, might be a more fruitful direction to search for. So I hope that all of you will join that work. There's some really, truly incredible work happening with Israelis and Americans together, both here and in Israel. So I just want to thank you all for being part of this panel, for participating with us. And we're going to get out of here so that they can reset it for the closing plenary. So thank you very much.